Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Tickets Please. I'm your host, Josiah Wampfler. On this episode, I'll be reviewing the brand new sci-fi epic from director Denis Villeneuve, Dune Part 2. After wowing audiences with Part 1 of his adaptation of Frank Herbert's famous novel, what new wonders does this second part hold for audiences? Then I'll talk to the director of operations for the Wisconsin Film Festival, Ben Reiser, about the lineup for this year's fest coming up in early April and the new venues being used this year. Finally, I'll conclude with a review of a very different kind of film, the much-maligned Madame Web. Is it really as bad as people say? It is, but I'll also tell you why that ended up being kind of fun. So let's expand our minds and dive into Dune Part 2. In 2021, director Denis Villeneuve released the first part of his adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune. Despite the novel being labeled unadaptable for years, it was met with praise and was one of my favorite films of that year. But the story was not complete. Now that the second part is finally in theaters, I'm happy to report that Denis has truly done it. While not completely perfect, Dune Part 2 is an astonishing sci-fi epic that is thematically rich, sonically immersive, and such a wild spectacle to behold that it demands to be seen again and again on the biggest screen you can find. Dune Part 2 picks up right where the first film left off. Paul Atreides, played by Timothée Chalamet, and his mother Jessica, played by Rebecca Ferguson, are now in the company of the Fremen, the indigenous people of the planet Arrakis. The Galactic Empire has for years pillaged the planet for spice, a precious resource that makes space travel possible. And Paul's father, Duke Leto, had been the latest in a long line of rulers given control of spice production on the planet by the Emperor. It was all a ruse, though. As a rival house, the Harkonnens soon launched a surprise attack with the help of the Emperor. Duke Leto was killed, the Atreides army defeated, and the Harkonnens took control of the planet. Paul and his mother barely escaped into the desert and have now joined up with the Fremen. Paul quickly sets out to prove himself to the Fremen, among whom there is a growing belief that he is a prophesied messiah meant to lead them to freedom and paradise. At the same time, a budding romance forms between himself and the Fremen Chani, played by Zendaya, who believes the messiah talk is not only false, but dangerous. His mother, whose Bene Gesserit religious order has spread such beliefs, fans the flames of fundamentalism among the Fremen and encourages Paul to embrace his destiny as their messiah. As Paul assimilates into Fremen culture, the push and pull between the two women in his life only gets more intense, as belief in him grows and the alluring nature of power beckons. I said in my review of Part 1 that Villeneuve is a master at creating spellbinding atmosphere, and that is even more apparent in Dune Part 2. The film is dripping with a near constant sense of dread, punctuated by brief moments of exhilarating excitement and bittersweet false hope. This is accomplished through his production design, score, sound design, and cinematography. While the desert has its own harshness, the halls of power that Villeneuve depicts here are highly brutalist, with sharp, angular lines that offer no relief. Their architecture also casts long, foreboding shadows that swallow his characters. These halls, toward which Paul is increasingly drawn, are unfeeling and inhumane. Hans Zimmer's unrelenting score is a huge aspect of Villeneuve's atmosphere. It is one of those scores that you feel in your bones, and when he decides to give us brief moments of relief, you feel it in your heart. Zimmer's theme for Paul and Chani, a soaring, heart-rending motif that accompanies their romance, elevates the tremendous chemistry between Chalamet and Zendaya. Its beautiful melody, punctuated by bursts of percussion, lends a truly epic quality to their romance, especially when combined with the sweeping vistas of the desert planet. The film's sound design works in concert with Zimmer's score to pack a gigantic punch, especially when seen in a theater with a great sound system. Masterfully crafted, immersive, and stunningly visceral, Villeneuve's images only feel as tactile as they do because of the inventive sound design. And so we get to those images, brilliantly crafted by cinematographer Greg Fraser. As Villeneuve said in a recent interview, the power of cinema lies in its images, and every single frame of Dune Part 2 is incredibly powerful. Exhilarating action sequences, sprawling landscapes, and one of the most stunning black and white sequences I've ever seen. The visual grandeur on display here is magical. Plus, as someone who adores slow-motion shots of characters walking like badasses, the film really spoke to me. Villeneuve is an incredible visual storyteller and has long been adept at capturing scale, evoking deep emotion with his compositions, and perhaps most importantly for this adaptation, conveying big, weird ideas wordlessly. He understands the power of negative space in the frame, using the harsh beauty of the desert expanse to make his characters feel tiny, or to show Paul as the terrifying, intoxicating figure that he is becoming. He also knows how powerful a close-up on an actor's face can be, and how much we can learn just from the reaction shots of his characters. Villeneuve uses those reaction shots of Lady Jessica and Chani in particular to great effect, and it is their faces that tell us the most about Paul's journey. Ferguson's performance as Jessica is the more showy of the two, as she fully transforms into a radical religious zealot, talking to her unborn child and serving up plenty of creepy line readings. She is the devil on Paul's shoulder throughout, driven by her fervent belief that he is the Messiah her order has been preparing for. Yet still, as Paul embraces this belief, we see her become more and more concerned by what he will do with that power. Zendaya as Chani is the beating heart of Dune Part 2, and the figure through which Villeneuve expresses its themes most clearly. Chani believes that the prophecy her fellow Fremen are getting so caught up in is not only a lie, but a tool for the galactic powers to control her people. As she says, this prophecy is how they enslave us. She is rightly wary of entrusting the liberation of her people to an outsider, especially from one of the galaxy's great houses, who have been pillaging their planet for years. For Paul, Chani represents a new path forward, turning away from the dark history of his lineage, living more closely with the natural world around him, and eschewing the powers he would wield if he gave in to religious fanaticism. His mother, on the other hand, represents the old path of domination over both the natural world and his fellow man. It's a choice between carrying on the sins of his ancestors or finally bending the arc of his own history toward justice. Frank Herbert was reportedly dismayed by readers' inability to see Paul as the tragic figure he was meant to be. As Paul marches toward his eventual heel turn, Zendaya's magnetic performance and Villeneuve's wise obsession with her face ensure that we do not make the same mistake. Paul is not meant to be a white savior, but a critique of that very trope. Dune Part 2 is a tragic tale about the terrible power religion can wield to control populations, a warning against blind faith in charismatic leaders, a grand metaphor for the destruction of our planet for the profit of the oil industry, and a commentary on the colonial subjugation of indigenous peoples around the world. Villeneuve conveys all of this in the best way he knows how, through image and sound. It's what makes Dune Part 2 such a powerful cinematic experience to witness in a movie theater. That being said, his dislike of dialogue, coupled with the gargantuan task of covering the amount of material he needed to cover, creates slight problems that prevent me from declaring the film a pure masterpiece. There's a couple of things here or there that could have been better fleshed out for the uninitiated. The third act suffers a tad from slight pacing issues, and certain characters could have been more fully realized. Plus, the most glaring issue is the lack of actors from Middle East or North African descent among the main cast, given how tied the Fremen are to Arab and Muslim cultures. Still, despite those issues, Dune Part 2 remains a shining example of the magic of the theatrical experience, and the power science fiction has to grapple with big ideas in a compelling manner. As the work of artists are increasingly devalued by the major studios, and the thinking that AI can replicate any of this has grown, Villeneuve has delivered a film that simply could not exist without the specific talent behind it. With tremendous performances from its cast and meticulous craftsmanship from those behind the scenes, Dune Part 2 is a towering cinematic achievement that also gives a general audience rich ideas to ponder. I'm giving Dune Part 2 4.5 out of 5 stars. It is currently out in theaters, and I would highly suggest experiencing it there. I'm here with Director of Operations for the Wisconsin Film Festival, Ben Reiser. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Josiah, thanks for having me on again. I feel like we're going steady at this point. This is like our third or fourth year doing this?
Yep, third year. Yep. I always like having you on and giving a little preview of the upcoming festival and talking about what it takes to put it all together. So, first of all, I guess this year's edition will take place from April 4th through the 11th, and it's going to be at 7 different venues across the city of Madison this year. So I wanted to start with the venues because that's the biggest change this year, obviously. So last year was unfortunately the final year in the AMC Hilldale location after it closed. So the festival obviously needed to find new partners in order to keep showing the number of films that you guys show. So tell me a little bit about securing the new locations and what people can expect there.
Yeah, thanks. So the first thing that happened was, as I'm sure we talked about last year, AMC Hilldale actually closed at the end of 2022. And so it was questionable whether we could be there last year at all, since there was not an active movie theater, and AMC was theoretically leaving 3 months before we got there and taking all their stuff with them, all the projection equipment, sound equipment, movie theater seats, et cetera, et cetera. But we talked to AMC and we talked to Hilldale, and they came to an agreement with each other, and then tied us into it, which was that AMC agreed to leave 3 theaters worth of projection equipment, sound equipment, all those seats and everything as is for us to use during the festival in 2023. And then also, we're just going to leave the equipment for us to do whatever we wanted with after that. So sort of donating a ton of equipment. And after a long process, we figured out 3 locations for that equipment. So we moved one set of projection and sound equipment over to the Barrymore Theater on Atwood, where we had been showing films at the festival in 2016 and 2017. Before we moved back on campus to Shannon Hall as our large venue. Barrymore has 750 seats, so that we're always looking for at least one big house like that to show the movies we think will be most popular and have our opening night film at. So that's where one set of stuff went. Then we cut a deal with the Bartell Theater on East Mifflin, another venue that we had used in past festivals. I think the last year that we were at the Bartell was 2012, but we were happy at the opportunity to use it again. They have a 200-seat theater, and so we brought another set of equipment and a screen and speakers and all that stuff over to the Bartell, and we've been working for months trying to set all that stuff up, make sure it's still working, make sure the screen is hanging properly and all that. And then the third location turned out to be a venue that I don't think we've ever used. I know we've never used at the festival, and I don't think has ever been a venue where anyone has ever shown a movie, but it's a wonderful venue right on campus, right sort of just about across the street from our Wisconsin Film Festival offices in Vilas Hall. And this is a building called Music Hall, which is not the same as the new Hamel Music Center, which is on University Avenue. Music Hall is an old building, I think probably one of, if not the oldest building on campus. It's at the base of Bascom Hill. It's on Park Street between University and I guess Langdon. It's across from the Humanities Building. It looks like a church. It's got a nice clock tower on the outside of it. But inside, it's a wonderful 243-seat theater that is under the jurisdiction of the School of Music these days, and they use it for their opera productions and opera classes as well. But otherwise, it's not used very much, and we talked them into letting us use it for the festival weekend. And so that's really exciting. And that sort of turns this year's festival footprint into something that feels a little bit more like it did back in the old days when we were all over the place, you know, up and down State Street, Monona Terrace, at the Bartell, at the Orpheum, all those kinds of things. And so that's nice. But then that still wasn't really a substitution for the 7 days that we've been having at the three screens at AMC Hilldale for the past 10 years or so. And Flicks Brewhouse in the Easttown Mall is the newest movie theater in town, and is a wonderful movie theater as far as sound and projection. And so we checked them out, and it turns out that they had at least three auditoriums that had enough seats for it to make sense for us. And so we made a deal with them, and we're going to be there for 4 days, the second half of the festival. So the festival schedule and footprint is as follows. Thursday, April 4th, we're at the Barrymore Theater at night showing a film that was nominated for Best International Feature at last night's Oscars. Didn't win, but still was on that short list of films. Io Capitano from Italy. And then on Friday, April 5th, we stay open at the Barrymore and then open up all of our campus venues, which are the Marquee at Union South, UW-Cinematheque, which is 4070 Vilas Hall, the Chazen Museum of Art, and as I've been talking about, this new venue for us, the Music Hall. And then we're also opening up at the Bartell Theater. So that's happening Friday, Saturday, and Sunday while we continue on at the Barrymore. And then after Sunday, all of those other venues shut down except for the Barrymore. And then we open up at Flicks Brewhouse for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So we'll have films all day long at Flicks on those days. And we're going to have at least one movie every night at the Barrymore. I think 3 out of 4 of those nights we're doing 2 movies at the Barrymore starting at like 5 o'clock.
I also just wanted to ask too about, because as far as I'm aware, nothing has yet happened with the old AMC Hilldale location. I did see recently the Milwaukee Film Festival, for instance, was able to purchase the Downer Theater there, and is once again using that once shuttered theater for their festival this year. I was just wondering if there are any talks, anything, any possibility that might be on the horizon for the AMC Hilldale location.
Yeah, the shorter answer is no. But the slightly longer answer is we did talk to Hilldale about that possibility. They actually approached us with an idea that they had where we would come in and run movies there for them at that location for the next, 18 months or so while they phase in their various reconstruction plans for that space. Hilldale is in sort of a constant kind of redevelopment stage. They're doing it in stages, but they are sort of drastically re-envisioning that campus of theirs. We were hoping to convince them that not only should they let us run 2 or 3 screens in that space for the next 18 months, but do it for the next 10 years, get a long-term commitment from them, which would allow us to not only have the festival there every year, but also run it as kind of an art house cinema throughout the year, kind of expand our UW-Cinematheque program so that it was like a nightly thing instead of 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. And we had conversations with them about that. We presented them with a business plan, but really it turned out that they are unwilling to make a long-term commitment with that space. They don't see that space as a movie theater in the future. They're not ruling out the idea of creating a new movie theater at some point. But to my understanding, it wouldn't be on street level, which is apparently the most valuable sort of commercial real estate property, like retail space. So they're envisioning that whole first floor of that building. They're redesigning it so that they are cutting it into much smaller spaces, each with its own outward facing door and windows, so that any number of retail shops can open up and do business there. So that's the answer to that. That's not happening. I'm still dreaming of Cinematheque and the festival finding a permanent home to use all year that we're not sharing with UW classes like we are at Cinematheque and 4070 Vilas Hall. Whether that space is on campus or off campus. That's a dream of mine, and I think it's shared by other people on staff. But for now, we've sort of put it on the back burner as we get ready for this year's festival.
Another thing I want to talk about was, so you're showing over 100 titles across this week. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on what goes into actually scheduling all of that. I've been very impressed in my time going there that I've pretty much been able to tick off most of my wish list every year without things overlapping, so I can't see them. So, do you guys think about genre preferences when you're laying out the schedule, or have I just gotten lucky?
I mean, we certainly do think of that. I would also say you've gotten lucky. I do hear from people every year, like you've made us make some impossible choices. How could you schedule this film against this film? And those are the only screenings of those two films. Are you crazy? And it's true. There's always going to be some tough choices if you look at the schedule, but we do think about, we do try to imagine ourselves as different festival goers who are interested in, let's say, documentaries or French films or American independence. And so we try to make it as much as we can. And, it's a crazy puzzle to try to put together a festival with, I think we have 141 or 142 films this year, to try to schedule all of those at 6 or 7 venues in 8 days and give people as many opportunities to see as many of those films as they might want to. It's an impossible task, and we always fail in some way, but we do spend a ton of time planning and then replanning, revising, changing. We do all of our scheduling on a wall in the office that Mike King and I share, and Jim Healy and Mike King and Terry Kerr, who programs the Big Screens Little Folk Selections, and I spend days in that office. We have post-its, and each post-it has the name of a film, and we've got these poster board things on the wall that have all the venues and the dates and the times, and we're constantly sticking post-it notes on the wall and then moving those post-it notes and reorganizing the post-it notes and trying to figure out, okay, if I have a Wisconsin Zone film that's showing here, I don't want to have another Wisconsin Zone film showing at the same time at a different venue. I think
Yep.
there are a couple occasions this year where that is the case. But yeah, I don't want to schedule, or we don't want to schedule all of the horror movies we're showing against each other.
Yeah.
Because there's you're exactly right. We try to think about if people are into this kind of a film, are we giving them opportunities to see most of, if not all of that genre of film, or are we making it impossible for them to see as many of them as they probably would want to?
So I know you'll probably be catching up on a lot of the films like the rest of us, but among the films you've already seen, I just wanted to have you give me a handful of films you're especially excited for people to check out.
Yeah, I do like horror films, and I got a chance to see this movie that we're showing called In a Violent Nature.
Mm,
Um, and for my money, it's the best horror movie I've seen in a couple of years, or at least since maybe Barbarian.
okay.
Um, it's an amazing slasher movie, but the most artistic, cinematic. It's like a Friday the 13th movie if somebody decided that they wanted to make a Friday the 13th movie that was a good movie. That was cinematic. It's like like an art director um uh, taking a stab at the Friday the 13th genre. I mean, it's not officially a Friday the 13th movie, but it's a Friday the 13th movie in everything but name, but it's like no other Friday the 13th movie you've ever seen. I just think it's really spectacular, and a movie that you need to see in a movie theater. And I don't think that there'll be another chance to see this movie in a movie theater. I'm pretty sure that it is already scheduled for streaming platforms
Yeah.
sometime in the next 6 months or so. Maybe they're going to do a commercial release, but I haven't heard such a thing. So
Yeah.
that's one that I am so excited that we're getting this screen. Another one is a movie that we considered for opening night, and it's called Humanist Vampire Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person. And I think we ultimately decided not to go with it for opening night because suicidal is in the title. And it
Yeah.
is, although it's more of a black comedy and almost like a romantic comedy than it is a horror film. I just think the title alone would turn enough people off that, you know, um, I think if they came and saw the film, I think most people would actually enjoy it quite a bit. But um, we ultimately went with a more obvious choice, I think, Io Capitano. But we are
Yeah.
showing Humanist Vampires Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person, I think, 2 times. Once at the Marquee over the weekend, and I think again over at Flicks Brewhouse during the second half of the festival. So
Yep.
that is another one that I am super psyched for us to show. Other than that, I mean, I've seen all of the Wisconsin Zone films, and there's a great documentary that we're showing called One with the Whale about this teenager living in Alaska in a small community. Uh, uh, and he is the designated whale hunter for a whole series of Inuit communities in Alaska, and it's his
Hmm.
responsibility to hunt food. I mean, they hunt foraging. Food is how they exist. How they feed themselves. And so we see him in his attempt to get enough food to feed his village and other villages. And then also the sort of pushback that happens on social media once people outside of this community hear about his story and sort of label him as some kind of a monster for,
Oh,
hunting
okay.
hunting whales. And so it's that sort of culture clash and just a really, really wonderful, compelling story about this kid and his family and the sort of larger issues around their way of life, and of course climate change and how much harder it is to fish these days.
Yeah, all three of those sound really interesting. So the final night of the festival is always special, and this year is no different. You have Alexander Payne's classic film Sideways showing the final night at the Barrymore, and he is going to be there in attendance. Even better, the Oscar-nominated director will be in town for the weekend after the festival, introducing 35mm prints of his latest film, The Holdovers, on Friday night, and William Wellman's Westward the Women on Saturday, both at the UW-Cinematheque. So Alexander Payne's a pretty big get. Talk to me about how that came about.
Well, Alexander was in town with us once before, I think in 2014 at the festival where he introduced an Italian film from the 60s. And in both instances, it's because he has a relationship with our senior programmer, Jim Healy, and we've interviewed Alexander for for our Cinematheque podcast over the pandemic. But they have an ongoing relationship, and we invited him for the Cinematheque screenings. And then we were able to convince him to come a day earlier than he had originally planned and do these last night of the festival things with us. So we're super excited to have him at the Barrymore for Sideways, and he's also introducing another film that night, The Long Haul, another film that he likes from I think the 60s, maybe the
Okay,
50s. Um,
nice.
so yeah, it's going to be a whole Alexander Payne weekend, and it's all because of his relationship with Jim Healy, who works for both programs. And that's that. Yeah, I got a chance to spend some time with him when he was here in 2014. He's a lovely guy. He's a true cinephile. It's always great talking about movies with him, and I think it's going to be a great time all weekend long.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I really enjoyed The Holdovers last year, so it'll be fun, especially to see it on 35mm like that.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, and I just have really enjoyed the Cinematheque programming, especially the premiere series this semester has been really excellent.
Yeah, and we've been packing them in. I mean, people say going to the movies is not a thing that happens anymore, but we're here to prove otherwise. Yeah, I think there are a couple of those premiere screenings we could have filled up a house that was twice as big as the one that we have, at least. We've turned lots of people away throughout the semester for various screenings, and which is great. I mean, it's a great problem to have.
Yep.
It's exciting to see that there really is still an interest in going to a movie, seeing a movie in a movie theater, especially a movie that you haven't already seen and you're walking in blind. You maybe read something about it, but you don't know if it's going to be any good or not. But yeah. We were able to have the Madison premiere of Zone of Interest.
Yep.
And yeah, our premiere series has been absolutely wonderful these last few years, and especially this past semester has been particularly mind-blowing as far as what we're showing and the amount of people showing up to see those films.
Yeah, for sure. So I just wanted to give folks that might be interested in what films I have scheduled just a rundown of my my selection this year. So I'm going to be seeing 17 different films
Nice.
across the week.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's not too shabby, Josiah. That's
no,
not too
yeah,
bad at all.
it's going to be fun. So obviously, opening night film, Io Capitano, Riddle of Fire, Coup, Do Not Expect Much from the End of the World, Janet Planet, Sweet Dreams, Ryuichi Sakamoto, Opus, The Monk and the Gun, Green Border, Red Rooms, Evil Does Not Exist, Humanist Vampire Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person, The Fabulous Ones, Kidnapped, The Burglars, The Echo, and La Chimera.
That's a magnificent schedule. Do you have time? Can you fit in a Violent Nature too? I don't know if you've got something that's going on opposite that.
After hearing your recommendation, I might have to now. I think I might have at least one open spot. I enjoyed how many films this year had ridiculously long titles. I've been comparing them to Panic at the Disco song titles. Very, very much enjoy a theme that seemed to be going on there.
It does seem to be a trend.
So
long titles and long running times, but sometimes the long titles are not in sync with the long running times. Sometimes
for sure.
Short titles and long running times. Sometimes it's long titles with short running times.
Yeah. So thank you again to Ben for this wonderful discussion and your tireless work in helping put together the festival every year. So again, the fest will run from April 4th to 11th here in Madison, Wisconsin. You can go to wifilmfest.org to find the schedule and get tickets. Plus, again, make sure not to miss the UW-Cinematheque's free and exciting programming every weekend this spring and into the future. Film culture in Madison is really, really great. Honestly, before moving here, I didn't know how great it was. And you're a huge part of that, and I thank you for all your work.
Thanks, Josiah. That's great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Oh, what the hell? She didn't see that coming? That's not how it works.
I've seen that man before.
So who is he?
Ezekiel Sims. He was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died.
Though once considered a way for studios to essentially print money, the current state of the superhero genre is bad. Marvel is struggling to remain relevant after recent misses. The Snyder-tainted DC universe has been humanely euthanized after years of mediocrity, with James Gunn now set to take over, and the Sony live-action Spider-Man universe has been misguided from day one. The genre's cultural staying power is waning. If you've seen Madam Web, the first of 3 baffling Sony Spider-Man films this year that don't actually feature Spider-Man, you'd be forgiven if you thought that the studio was actively trying to kill the genre themselves. An audaciously 2003 film that feels more like a bad slasher film at times than your run-of-the-mill superhero film, Madam Web is incomprehensibly stupid. Based on a Marvel Comics character that they had to completely change for this ill-conceived story, Madam Web follows Dakota Johnson's narcissistic and sociopathic ambulance driver, Cassandra Webb, with 2 Bs, who discovers that she can see the future.
I can see the future!
When she sees an evil spider person in a cheap black costume attacking a group of 3 girls in her visions, she must intervene to save them and find the most Looney Tunes way to defeat this new villain. Madam Web is a big-budget flop dumber than most. The editing is atrocious, constantly disorienting the viewer and trampling all over the performances of its cast. The script is somehow even worse, hamstringing the performers further with bad exposition-heavy dialogue. The chemistry between the 3 high school girls is uneven, with moments of fun and even longer stretches where it feels like they are all waiting for the next line. But the most glaring issue, and the funniest, is with our evil Spider-Person villain, Ezekiel Sims. Played by Tahar Rahim, who is blameless, it appears they did ADR for his entire performance, a process where an actor re-records their audio and it is inserted in post. Unhelped by a terrible sound mix that makes this obvious, Sims is a laughably dumb villain. And I loved every second he was on screen. Yes, I am a Madame Web defender, in that I think sometimes there can be beauty, or at least comedy, in failure. Obviously, the film is helped by the recent paint-by-numbers approach by many of the other offerings in the genre. To see something different was entertaining. Plus, it's nice to feel a directorial vision at the center of this thing, even if that vision was making a lot of poor decisions, and is constantly hampered by studio stupidity. Madame Web is not a well-directed film. It is too maximalist, the tone fluctuates wildly, and the performances are uneven. But there is an interesting visual style that at times succeeds, and at least is taking big swings, even if many of them miss. But beyond that, the real reason Madame Web turned out to be such campy, stupid fun is Dakota Johnson. An incredibly compelling actress, both on the screen and during press tours.
Can you name the 3 Spider-Man Tom Holland movies?
Yeah, Spider-Man, here he comes.
Here he comes,
That's number 1.
Yep.
Spider-Man, and he's back. And the other one, the last one is the Goblet of Spider-Man.
Johnson gives the most consistent performance in the film, largely because it seems like she didn't care the entire shoot. There's something very interesting about watching a talented performer like Johnson really lean into not giving a single F. It kind of works for her character, who is a woman who has a hard time caring about much, but it also leads to some incredibly hilarious line readings that had my theater absolutely cackling. There's a particular scene at a baby shower that is the cornerstone of Johnson's performance, and is an example of why it is so damn funny. So no, when I say that I love Madame Web, I'm not talking about loving it for its quality. It is a very poorly constructed film, that is obvious. But sometimes it's just really fun to watch the building burn nonetheless, and the decisions made here are so baffling that many of them become unintentionally hilarious. Plus, in a genre that has become so static, filled with movies that refuse to swing for something above mediocrity, a fun, visionary failure can jolt you awake and give you a thrill. Madame Web at least succeeds in that. Since a star rating simply does not suffice, I'm giving Madame Web 5 out of 5 tenths, because it truly takes you to camp. It might still be in theaters. Either way, watch it if you find enjoyment in truly bad movies. That will do it for this episode of 2 Tickets Please. You can find more of my written content at 2ticketsplease.substack.com, including my top 20 films of 2023. Thanks for watching.